Total War has been a series by which 2022 has dealt with both historical and fantasy genres, but no matter the setting, has always been relegated to pre-modern ways of war, where two sides clash together, where fighting ensues, and where one side ultimately comes out on top. The most modern game we've had has been the excellent Fall of the Samurai campaign set in Japan in the mid-19th century, where somewhat advanced rifles, cannons, and ships dominate the battlefields. When it comes to mods, however, the latest possible age we've been able to visit is that of World War I, with the mod The Great War, an excellent mod which really transforms Napoleon Total War. But what about World War II? Well, I'm here to tell you that a Total War World War II absolutely would work, as long as Creative Assembly would be willing to take some important and necessary steps out of its comfort zone and think differently, just like it did with the Warhammer series. And if that sounds good to you, I hope you leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. It would really go a long way and allow me to make more videos just like this one, and others. And now, why Total War World War II absolutely would work. It's understandable that the Total War series hasn't seen a game in the modern era yet, at least in the era of actual Total War, the name which the series is named after. Because, if World War II proved anything, it was that warfare would never be the same again. World War II saw Europe at war with itself once more after only 20 years of peace, and this time there wasn't going to be any room for neutral nations as long as you stood in the way of the dictatorships. By 1945, the old alliance of France, Britain, and United States had managed to stand firm, and together with countless other countries in both Europe and all over the world, including the invaluable yet somewhat sussy baka Soviet Union, they managed to beat back Germany and its allies. By the end, it's estimated that around 80 million people died because of the war, being by far the most destructive conflict in history. So, without any further context, let's examine how a Total War World War II could work. Reason number 1. Rethinking Warfare. There's no denying that a World War II battle map would look drastically different from what we've seen before, but Creative Assembly has proven that it's capable of innovating and trying out new things. The Warhammer series not only gave us single hero units running around the battlefield, but also flying units hovering over everything. So then, I think the number one biggest obstacle to a World War II game would be the battlefields. Now, how do we fix this glaring issue? Well, I think it would require a whole lot of bravery on the part of CA, but let's try to work something out here, just you and me, and maybe help them in the right direction. At least World War I generally had two armies meeting one another face to face with static front lines, am I right? World War II also had front lines, of course, but they were on a completely different scale than before. First of all, I think battlefields would have to be completely reworked, and I think Paradox has set a really great example here. And on that part, due to the scale of the war, front lines in their World War II games, namely Hearts of Iron, are radically different from those in Crusader Kings or the EU series, for example, and they're even taking this philosophy into the upcoming Victoria 3 game. Here, units are pumped and stacked into a front line covering a country's entire border, or as much of it as you're able to at least. When battles begin, everything kind of changes, and the armies move back and forth rather than a single isolated battle, meaning the difference between victory and defeat. Let's try to translate this system to Total War. First of all, we obviously wish to retain our battle maps. That is, after all, what the Total War series is all about. However, we need to move away from the single field battles. So how do we do that? Well, first, we remove the banner-carrying armies on the campaign map. No longer shall we be oppressed by the armies walking across the map everywhere. Instead, we need army groups covering entire front lines. And this is how I imagine them on the campaign map. Instead of having giant army models here and there, we need actual representations of armies all around our front lines. Think of what it looks like in Hearts of Iron, with individual soldiers, tanks, and artillery occupying territory. Although I would see these models be even smaller and really cover and move about a territory almost as if they were a part of it, really showing how affected an area is by their placement there. A war taking place would further show battle scars and large fires stretched across areas, and if no active battles were being fought manually, you could still see shots being fired and things happening down there on the campaign map. Now, I think that sounds really cool. But okay, what about the battle map then? Well, here's my idea. Instead of having battles essentially being capable of resolving wars after a victory, I think battles could be played out over days or even several battles. We would have to expand the battlefields, stretch them much further in every direction, for example. And since you're either pushing forward or defending with certain armies within the group, it would be awesome if you had manual control of one army while seeing your other armies fight alongside you in the distance. The battles themselves I imagine as working kinda like they do in the Steel Division series, which actually offer quite large and realistic World War II battlefields. But here is an area where Total War, with all its resources and talent, could really shine. We could have even larger battlefields here with even more units, not grouped along lines as they are in current games, but be a tad more hands-off. Again, we need to think radically here, and I think a great way of approaching this unprecedented time period would be to once more look to Paradox. Here, you're not directly in charge of your troops, but their numbers, training, air support, terrain, and technology are what determines battles ultimately. As such, we could have a situation where Total War World War II allowed us to view battle maps up close, send our troops to the front, determine artillery and airstrikes, and even control certain divisions or tank groups and strategies, or even smaller infantry units ourselves, taking inspiration from Steel Division or the more tactical Company of Heroes games. But again, on a much larger scale and as part of much larger battles. Whatever happened down there would influence the campaign map, having victories mean that front lines would dynamically change and move one way or the other, or even remain in place. Taking this to the naval side of things would be much easier, as we basically have the template for modern naval battles already, although we would need larger ships with more firepower, and even the use of aircraft carriers with fighters and bombers partaking in battles as special units. When it comes to air battles themselves, they could either be more rare, being used as special units taking part as regular land battles, or even have their own unique battle types with purely air-to-air combat, kinda like in the Battle for Britain, where one could even factor in the amount of anti-air artillery present on the ground below. All in all, I really think this could work, but Creative Assembly would be willing to innovate and really move away from the tried and true formula for a title such as this, which in my opinion is actually high time. Now, another place to innovate is obviously the campaign, which we've kinda touched upon already with the unit models and such. However, changing the campaign is a far easier job than the battle maps. If we look at Napoleon, we do know that cities in these times were much larger than they were in medieval times, yet every Total War game uses more or less the same system here. In this regard, I don't think Total War would have to change much. We could still have individual cities doing most of the heavy lifting, but I think it would be wise to add smaller areas of interest for resource or factory purposes, making those strategic locations important to control if one really wanted to get that oil, steel, or rubber resources for example, no longer being tied to the control of a city, but instead tied to the control of the actual tile of land the resource is located on. In addition, I think it would be a wonderful addition to be able to order the construction of fortifications indeed in locations, placing artillery nests and the like, which would make the campaign feel so much more alive and organic, always changing with the course of the war. We could have planes doing bombing runs, trains and ships be used as transportation of soldiers, ammunition, resources and vehicles this time, making the control of trade lanes a crucial part of the war effort and important to maintain. Airplanes could then be used to destroy or sabotage these, either in preparation for invasions or during the war itself. On the diplomatic side of things, I think Total War took some great major steps with Three Kingdoms. And honestly, even though World War II is much more about war than diplomacy, much could still change, especially if keeping things open to change and starting the campaign in a year like 1936. Having special possibilities surrounding trade and military aid would be crucial to maintain diplomatic complexity and cooperation during the war, which would create a much more deliberate and important minigame, making allies and the concept of coordination and support that much more vital. In addition, spies play a much larger role in stealing technology or finding enemy plans or troop movements, and could even be used to infiltrate governments or perhaps even topple them in certain cases. So the big question, why do we even want a Total War World War II? Well, I have two answers for you. First, a World War II game would represent a massive leap for the series and would really show that Creative Assembly dares to work outside of its entrenched, no pun intended, formula. Right now, Total War has basically remained the same for 20 years with no major structural changes other than more colorful and powerful units on the battlefield, and obviously some deeper diplomacy options. But the fundamentals remain the same in theory. It would therefore be absolutely awesome to see this series take a big step forward into the unknown and really see what they could do with an alternate and new, daring take on the tried and true, yet predictive formula. Second, and my major final point, is that it would be so amazing to finally see a World War II game that took that extra step, that took 2 steps further than any other, and give us that mix of battles and campaign, much deeper and more revolutionary than the one seen in the formulaic Company of Heroes series, and even one more dramatic and realistic feeling than the campaign map only Hearts of Iron approach. A Total War World War II would most likely be the go-to World War II video game experience for decades to come, especially now that CA has shown that they can create visually beautiful and mechanically optimized games on a large scale, and combined with the sounds, sights, and scenes of Total War, a game encompassing this era of history would be nothing short of historic. So, do you think a Total War World War II is possible? Do you think it's something CA would ever consider making? Perhaps even on a theater of war by theater of war basis? If not, then why not? I'd love to hear your opinions on this topic, and hear what you thought of my suggestions. I must say that making a Total War set in this era would be a challenge indeed, but I very much do think it's possible if one puts goodwill forward, and if one is willing to actually change things up. Total War has been the same for so many years, and will likely continue to remain so. And even though I love it, I really want to see a bigger change happen as well, at least once. Friends, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I hope you leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. It would really go a long way in helping me continue my work on the channel, and make more videos just like this one, and beyond. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.